All right. Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody had a great night. You enjoyed yourself. It was a nice night. I know I walked around. It was really nice. So I hope you all enjoyed it, and you're looking forward to the rest of the today. So just again, a few housekeeping. I'm sure you have found the washrooms by now. So if you haven't, then you're, I don't know, quite magical, I guess. The elevator smudging. Smudging isn't in the room, but this over by the couch. If the couch is in the corner there, if you need some quiet place. Again, this is a hybrid meeting. It will be recorded. Nobody's indicated they have any challenges about being photographed or used, but if you do or change your mind, then please let the staff know at the front. And again, those of you online on the hybrid, there's a hybrid ambassadors there.
Join the
Have
meeting.
questions, because there will be a bit of a question and answer period after the next session. If you have questions, put them in the chat and they'll help monitor them and let me get the questions to me. And we'll go back and forth between the room and those of you online. Probably if you, everything today is in English, so if you don't need your headsets today, we've got the QR codes. I think you've sorted that out. The one highlight today, and hopefully you're all staying a little bit longer, is the museum longhouse guided tour at 1 o'clock till 2:15, and you can get your tickets from the AFN staff at the registration desk. It's really, really neat. So if you have a chance to do that, it would be great to do that if you're staying a bit longer. And then we have, and if I can just ask Larry and Cactus if they want to start coming up, we can start there. So our first session of the day is Indigenous Laws and Institutions, a panel discussion with a facilitated discussion, and we'll just have a seat and take the yellow ones. They're more comfortable. And I'll have, so we've got a Cactus Cook Sunday, and we've got Larry McDermott, but I'll have you guys introduce yourselves, and because I'm sure you'd want to do a welcome or acknowledge the territory and whatnot. So who is going to go first? Larry? Okay. Whatever. Okay. So we'll have a 20-minute each discussion, and then we'll have time for questions afterwards. Great. Thank you.
Sego. Go at Neos, you get Goa. Hello. First, I'd like to acknowledge the Huron-Wendat Nation for hosting and for having me here. My name is Cactus Cook Sunday. I'm from Akwesasne. I work for the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne. We're situated in Quebec and Ontario. So let's start with our, I'm nervous, sorry, I don't like speaking in public, so I'm gonna forget things that aren't written down on my notes. I started with the Justice Department 1 year ago, almost 1 year today. So I'm relatively new to justice in general, but I worked since 2005 on specific claims. I started as a researcher. Right out of university. I did my master's while I was researching. We settled 3 claims while I was working for the Aboriginal Rights and Research Office, which is part of Mohawk Council. And we most recently had a claim, the Seaway claim, which was a large claim, that the community voted down. We weren't happy with the negotiations. We weren't happy with the offer. So is this? Okay, back. No, I can do it. So I'll start off with our Justice Department. It's divided into 4 programs. The Akwesasne Legislative Services does community consultation. We have working task groups to work on our laws. We have passed Akwesasne Legislative Enactment Procedural Regulation. We have general referendum regulations, and we also have an Akwesasne Law Registry. The Akwesasne the Akwesasne Representative and Advocacy Program is a child and family rights advocacy program in response to Bill C-92. That's a relatively new program as well. We have the Akwesasne Court, which operates under the Akwesasne Court law. We have draft Akwesasne Court regulations, and we're hoping to finish those up very soon. We also have an appellate division. And we have the Akwesasne Community Justice Program. We do restorative justice, diversion programs for youth and adult offenders. We have victim support services, youth prevention, Native inmate liaison officers, Section 83. And we have a council of elders called the Ni Galigot Council. So today's presentation will be an overview of the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne Justice Department's evolution. Yesterday, today, tomorrow. It's about Akwesasne's journey to where it is today and where it will be in the future. I'm very optimistic. So just a little history. The Ohade Goswanta is the two-row wampum, created in the early 1600s with the Dutch. I quote, "In one row is a ship with our white brothers' ways, in the other a canoe with our ways. Each will travel down the river of life side by side. Neither will attempt to steer the other's vessel." That is the basis for our court and our laws and the way we govern ourselves. The covenant chain was originally symbolic, beginning with alliances between the Haudenosaunee, of which Mohawks are a part, in the beginning, and colonists, but it evolved into a more complex metaphor when alliances broke down over the years. It became known as the silver covenant chain because metal chains rust and silver can be polished. It means that peace must be revisited from time to time. It's diplomacy. It stands for diplomacy. It began with the diplomacy that's since been embedded in Haudenosaunee tradition since contact, since our ancestors were forced to deal with intruders into their lands. Then the concepts and the ideas that came after what we now call pre-Confederation Royal Proclamation of 1763. And after that, the Indian Act, Section 107, et cetera, et cetera. Akwesasne began writing our community laws in the early 1960s. The first written law was a waterworks system bylaw. Like many early First Nation laws, Akwesasne's were pragmatic. I should say, like many First Nations written laws, they're really pragmatic. They met community needs. And especially for Akwesasne, because of our jurisdictional issues, the 1921 Boundary Commission placed the international border right in the middle of our community. And it was further complicated by the Quebec-Ontario provincial boundary. So the game changer for our court and our justice system was the couples property law of 2013. No external government authorization or acknowledgement was sought for this law. Our community ratified it. It was a real game changer. Indigenous laws were never enforced. Our ancestors were taught the ways things work. And I heard that again and again yesterday from the presenters. The principle behind our community laws is Gaina Let Goa, the great law, handed to us from the Creator. It's our foundation. And the Ahondo Galiwadekwa, our Thanksgiving address, is our recital and reminder of what we owe to our world and to our people. So this is an overview of the Akwesasne Court. It began operating with Section 107 justices in 1999, and the Akwesasne Court law was ratified officially in 2016. It came to regulate the way our court operates. So the principles of our court are skana, peace, kasistansala, strength, and ganigotlio, a good mind. And the values of the Akwesasne Court, we value individuals taking responsibility for their actions, that every person has unique gifts, and the goals of sanction is to restore balance to our community and not only to punish. So this is today. Akwesasne Court hears civil matters, infractions on our community laws, and traffic violations. And right now we're building toward a healing to wellness court, otherwise a drug court. It's an inherent right court that implements Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. It predates the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and the TRC recommendations. Our community laws are adjudicated. We have 100% First Nation court personnel. We implement the Mohawk language into all of our laws. There is a mediation program, and we also have an elders council called the Ninkanigot Elders Council, the Good Mind Council. So we see benefits to having our own court, moving away from the adversarial approaches back toward Haudenosaunee values of keeping a good mind and our cultural values. Justices have knowledge of the community rather than bringing in and having to go to an adversarial court off territory. There's a shared fairness procedure in court without colonialist sentencing ideologies. There are fair decisions of the court, the principles of natural justice. We share this earth. You have a responsibility to keep it safe and peaceful. What I want to do as a director is to help reinvigorate the Akwesasne Court because it is underutilized right now in its current state. And I know we can do it because we have the capacity. We have an excellent court administrator and a court clerk. The goal is to have recognition of our laws and our justices' rulings and decisions as our own people, self-sustaining system of justice, to have our laws fully implemented into our claims and the federal processes that affect us. So Akwesasne Court speaks to the First Nation custom of helping and healing individuals to make change. The law defines restorative justice as an approach to remedying a harm where a person takes responsibility for their actions. The appropriateness of the sanction is determined by the needs of the victim, the community, and the offender, and where the objective is to help restore relationships and harmony in the community. So this is a simple graphic that my predecessor, Joyce King, came up with, just showing progression. But it kind of spoke to me the first time that I saw it. I just wanted to share it. So in order to sustain our Akwesasne Court and our justice system, we have trainings that are delivered to our justices. So there's 12 of them, there's 12 modules, and you can see ethics, the processes, obviously the jurisdictional issues when it comes to Akwesasne, the charter of rights, legal issues, and that's currently always being updated. And just the procedural and sentencing and alternatives, youth, writing judgments. So I'm taking you into tomorrow now. We finalized an additions to reserve process in 2020, I believe, the last one we did. So our model for environmental assessments and land surveys bases itself in the Wendake. Currently, this is done in conjunction with Environment Canada and our land surveyors. Obviously, our goal as the Mohawk Council formally proposed to Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada in 2019 is to have our laws and customs reintegrated into how the two rural wampum laid it out, to coexist but not to interfere. What I want is a modernization of community laws versus recognition of inherent rights and customary laws. So one of the things that I wonder is whether we're truly seeking external recognition and acknowledgement of our contemporary laws. Are we creating these community laws in response to the Indian Act and subsequent legislation that affected us? Or are we demanding things of Canada that we have had and deserve all along? We're not asking permission, we're taking it back, taking back control of what was ours to begin with. So we're developing right now the Akwesasne Child Rights and Responsibilities Law. That's in response to 2019's Bill C-92, which was a federal act that recognizes the First Nations community's rights to protect our own children, families, and to legislate as such within our own communities. We're meeting internally with our own Department of Public Safety on the issue of enforcement. It's not to say that our current laws are rudimentary. Some of them are quite sophisticated. In my opinion, they were written aspirationally. And this is where the duality factor comes in for me. We're governing ourselves the way our custom dictates and within a legal system that was foisted upon us. With our community laws, our court, with our own diversions, and our own elders council, we can address our contemporary issues using our own customs and not under Canadian law. I was advised when I first started almost a year ago to be modest in my goals. In one way, it's wise advice because I don't want to bite off more than I can chew. But us Mohawks were very ambitious and we're very brave. And I'm also encouraged that we're not starting from the beginning. I'm greatly encouraged by the forum here, by the knowledge that was shared. And I've learned so much over this year. And I'm very honored and humbled to have been invited to speak here. Something stuck with me. My former professor, who happened to be Dr. Elsa Stamatopoulos, she was one of the original drafters of the the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. She teaches her students the importance of the Declaration calling us peoples rather than people. She really stressed this in her teaching about how their group of original drafters fought very hard for it to be named peoples rather than people, because we're not homogenous. We're not an homogenous collective. We're all different groups of people with different needs, with different customs and knowledge and views of the earth, our mother. With that, I thank you. Go, merci. Oh, there's my contact info if anyone wants to. Yeah.
For somebody who was nervous, you did fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Elder Larry McDermott.
Kway. I'm Cindy Shakosmak Wendodam, Shabatabajan First Nation Indigiba. Chimigwich for having me here. Chimigwich to the Huron-Wendat Nation for hosting us, and to your ancestors for caring for the land in order that this beautiful land inspires us, gives us strength to do the work that we're doing today. And also to the elder for her opening, connecting us in an important way, mindful of how important ceremony is in the work that we do. And I want to touch on that a little bit in my presentation. So I was asked to talk about Indigenous law and institutions, international institutions, specifically the environmental area. I'll say I was part of the Indigenous delegation that went to Rio in 1992, the Earth Summit. Other meetings in between, but also Nagoya in 2010. And then later participated in the Pathways 1 process. And the Pathways 1 process borrowed from Canada's origin story. So, and this is a concept presented by Dr. Reg Croshu, and accepted by the co-chairs of Pathways One, Shannon Phillips, who I heard announced her retirement from government yesterday, I think it was. A very brave woman who was followed around by police, and I think is going to win that court case. I think it's at the sentencing stage. But kudos to her for having the strength as one of the co-chairs to bring forward the concept of ethical space and of bringing forward oral traditions along with written governance systems. So just to give a quick little taste of that, what was proposed and accepted was that the smudge and the gavel are considered equivalent. Robert's Rules of Order, the 7 grandfather teachings or 7 sacred gifts were considered equivalent and used. I'm gonna back up chronologically a little bit. So I'm looking for water. Okay, thank you. I thought I forgot mine. Anyhow, and so the whole process was opened in pipe ceremony on Maple Island in Ottawa. It had rained for 4 days, rained very hard. And I can remember the government rep from Parks Canada who was leading the Parks Canada had, thank you very much. Had the mandate to guide the process. And I'm not sure I was clear enough. The process was Canada fulfilling its obligations under the Convention on Biological Diversity. And what happened in 1992 at the Earth Summit, where there were 3 conventions struck: the Convention on Climate Change, the Convention on Biological Diversity, and the Convention on Desertification, which to me was poorly named. It should have been soil loss, because we've lost 25% of our soil globally. It isn't just deserts, it's a lot of factors. So those 3 conventions were struck. There was very strong Indigenous delegation there. I remember Frank Calder, the first Indigenous senator, Nishka. I stayed in touch with him until he passed on. And there was a sense of hope. There were all kinds of events that led up to that. There were a number of marches, Indigenous marches across Turtle Island, speaking out for Mother Earth. I have a picture on my phone, and I gave a minute or 2 to look for it. But it's a picture in 1977 in which Indigenous representatives for the first time met with the United Nations in Geneva. And actually, Cactus Jose Barrero was among them. Jose, I'm from not far away from Akwesasne, and we very quickly this morning connected with people we know, some of whom I've been working with for 50 years or more. And on this international work, people like Gudgie Cook, Jose Barrero, Henry Lickers, and others. Anyhow, so as part of putting forward the 3 treaties, and they are treaties, there was a recognition of primary knowledge groups, and one of those was and is Indigenous peoples. 8J was created, a facility for Indigenous delegates. Anytime there were COP meetings, that's Convention of the Parties. So when all government representatives came together, there was always a facility for Indigenous peoples, but it was always off to the side. Western science was always number one. Indigenous knowledge systems were treated as second fiddle. And but recently, I feel there was something that happened in Nagoya in 2010. Evo Morales was the president of Bolivia then, Indigenous president. There were a number of countries with Indigenous leadership and working together. And when it came time to ratify the third protocol on benefit sharing, to complete the process of ratifying the Convention on Biological Diversity, those Indigenous-led countries stood up and said, we're going to support it, but we honestly don't feel it's enough, that we need to work harder. And I remember at the time, Bolivia had organized Pachamama, our Mother Earth, and a whole declaration of Indigenous thinking around what really needs to be done to reverse biodiversity loss, to address climate change and desertification. I was in the room when that happened. It was very, very powerful. I will say at the same time, for the record, there are a couple of things that happened. I can remember sitting with Kenneth Deere, Ellen Gabriel, Mackenzie Abrams, an Innu lawyer, talking with Canadian officials about UNDRIP. And this one individual said, yeah, if we'd have had a little more time, we could have improved it. And Kenneth Deere piped up, no, you'd have killed it. And Canada was the only country in Nagoya to object to UNDRIP being in the preamble of the benefit and sharing protocol until Minister Prentice, his last day in government, because he resigned the next day, while he was on the bullet from Tokyo to Nagoya, phoned ahead and said, release the objection. But that was the kind of, that's some of the history. But, and then we had the Kunaman Montreal meetings, in which the Kunaman Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework has been created. But I'm jumping ahead. I want to talk about this Pathways One process, what it was inspired by. I mentioned Canada's creation story. So what was explored was the proclamation of 1763. And of course, scholars like John Burroughs point out that sovereignty was acknowledged in writing more than once, preparatory to the treaty negotiation in July of 1763. Wampum strings were carried by Algonquin and Nipissing runners. Took them, in some cases, 3 months one way to bring those wampum strings and invite delegates to those treaty negotiations. Delegates attended with full agency, given that sovereignty had been acknowledged. Wasn't perfect. I mean, there was some strange things, including, I'll leave it at that. And so, but there were some fundamentals. One of the fundamentals that was accepted, I'm going to pause here and just say there were 2,000 to 2,500 delegates, Indigenous delegates that showed up, prepared by their communities, very mindful of what was at stake and of caring for the land as their ancestors had before them. So this is kind of the background. The chief negotiator for the British Crown was Sir William Johnson, who had 8 children with Mohawk clan mother Molly Brant, and who knew wampum protocol. And all sessions were open. The British Crown very well knew the importance of the pipe. They knew the importance of smudging and other ceremonies. And so that was part of the negotiation process, an acknowledgement of Indigenous laws, protocols, customs in forming a treaty. There were the covenant chain was acknowledged, and I'll leave that to most Mohawk scholars to speak to. The dish with one spoon treaty that scholars and knowledge keepers like Rick Hill talk about as having been accepted by over 65 First Nations, one of the largest treaty ever. And it was a treaty, simply put, that cared for the land, that said, take what you need, and even temper that with thinking about the needs of others. And always keep the dish clean, acknowledging our rights under creation to feed, to shelter, to find medicines, to clothe our families, our children, but to do so in a way that respects that web of life that we're part of, not superior to, not inferior to, but have a sacred relationship to. So that was part of the what was on the table and what was accepted at that time. And then the 7 grandfather teachings were accepted, and there's more to it. So jumping forward to 2017 and Pathways 1 and Canada delivering on its responsibilities under the Convention on Biodiversity, it was agreed to set up a model of governance that respected both oral and written. So, as I mentioned earlier, we opened up with a pipe ceremony on Maple Island, and that was one of 2 times in which the steering committee, representing the territories, provinces, the feds, and ICE, the Indigenous Circle of Experts, and NAP, the National Advisory Panel, that included representation from mining, forestry, agriculture, environmental NGOs, and some Indigenous. So one time, everybody gathered. That's when ethical space was triggered, when those 2 governance systems came together. In fact, I'm just going to very quickly, from One with Nature, which was the government report, and referring to that pipe ceremony, the concept of ethical space was introduced to the Pathway Initiative through Dr. Reg Croshoe, a Blackfoot cultural and spiritual advisor and member of the National Advisory Panel. In June 2017, Dr. Croshoe and Elder Larry McDermott led pathway committees in an opening pipe ceremony to demonstrate the intent, and I heard that word used a lot yesterday, to collaborate and co-create an ethical space to work together over the course of the following year. For some members of the committees, the pipe ceremony was new and unknown, but it was open hearts that we participated. Later, it was in this report, it was exclaimed that it was essential to the paradigm shift, needed to come up with recommendations. I believe that it was the spiritual intentions, it was the power of the land that influenced the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. That's jumping ahead. There were the 2 bodies, the Indigenous Circle of Experts, which produced We Rise Together, and lots of excellent recommendations. The interesting one, I spent a fair amount of time, and I found it interesting. I thought, ooh, sitting with mining, forestry, and agriculture. Used to be a goalie. Got a save there. That one of the things that they did is they set together some principles before recommendations were created. And they said things like Canada needs to achieve our obligations under then Aichi Target 11. That's protected areas. And there may be some questions about that, but I think in the interest of time, I'm going to have to be careful. And focus on achieving all our commitments under the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. This includes considering how the CBD intersects with other international responsibilities, including the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the Paris Climate Change Agreement, and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So they were all considered to be foundational to the work focusing on biodiversity loss. And they go on to say Canada can demonstrate leadership in shaping better relations between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples and with nature by bringing together Indigenous and non-Indigenous worldviews and knowledge systems to achieve reconciliation with one another and the earth. This means working together in ethical space to forge a path to living in harmony with nature. That's one thing about natural law. It affects us all. And just a quick taste of some of the recommendations that came out of this committee that included non-Indigenous and Indigenous. In recommendation 1, there are 5 bullets. I'm going to read 2. Embraces Indigenous worldviews that acknowledge we are one species among many that share the earth with the rest of life, and achieves our collective conservation goals within a framework of reconciliation and the creation of ethical space. So the framework, the governance, to me, the governance framework was critically important to influencing how we discuss things. I remember Reg and I with the National Advisory Panel, we spent 3 days explaining how ethical space, and in particular the 7 grandfathered teachings, would work. People wanted to jump ahead, what I call the Cappuccino Express, those deliverables, those deadlines, but it's about relationship building. And so we held the line on that. And it was interesting because in the final review, that, for example, the National Advisory Panel had on what worked, the one universal, the most noted element that worked was the opening and closing ceremony for every meeting. And it even got that on occasion, people would ask if there was tensions, they would actually ask for a smudge. And I can remember with with Canada's conservation vision, they tried to wrap it all up by Zoom, and it wouldn't work. So we had to meet at what is now the Museum of History, and we did. And a few days before that, the mining representative gave birth to a baby girl. And that was about 15 minutes after my daughter gave birth to a baby girl. And so in the opening ceremony, we had to go outside. That was the rules. It was minus 35. But I brought up this new life that we were connected to and reminded everyone of our responsibilities to that life. That life is constantly renewing, and how important our work was. That was much more important than our egos or anything else. Just that web of life, that natural law. I wanted to, I don't know if you can see this. I don't know how well this is going to show up on camera, but you'll notice that we created a chart, and Reg and Cliff Supernaut, the co-chair of the National Advisory Panel, and myself decided to change the earth into a heart shape. On one side, you have the Western obligations, a definition for ethical space. On the other side, First Nations, Inuit, Métis, Indigenous ways of knowing, oral tradition systems. And Reg and I put in reconnecting with Mother Earth's being and laws. And that stressing that was our role in this co-governance system was to remind everybody that they had responsibilities to Mother Earth's laws, recognizing that we couldn't represent every Indigenous law, that we could only generalize. And so that was a limitation of the process. However, when in enacting, whether it's the Convention on Climate Change, biodiversity, what have you, when you start talking about Indigenous protected and conserved areas, then individual laws come to play. And so it's expected at that point in the application of policy and that individual, as Stephen said yesterday, perspectives will come to play. I'm just watching the clock and it's, yeah. Okay. Yeah, well, maybe for both of us. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to end it there because for me, it's always important to allow time for dialogue, for questions, and careful. Okay. Shimi Gledge.
They're great. Thank you. Thank you for that. You have a long history, and thank you for sharing it. And we look forward to hearing more. So there's time for questions. So I have the computer. So if people are going to put questions in the chat, they can do that, or in the room. Somebody has microphones. There was a question again about the presentations. The presentations will be online and uploaded at some point. Oh, we've got a question in the room. Oh, you need a microphone.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lori Worm, and I work with the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations in the Lands and Resources Secretariat. I have a question for the lady who did her presentation that was really interesting. How long has the court, Akwesasne Court, been operative, and does the RCMP or do you have your own policing? Like how are the laws enforced?
Sean, it should two. You know, just put it on. Microphone two. Try it now.
So the Akwesasne Court started in 1999, hearing the early community laws, violations of those. They were mostly, like I said, really practical laws about loose dogs, wastewater, and it was functioning. We had at the time 3 Section 107 justices, and it's gone through a lot of evolutionary years, but it's still operating. We're hoping to make it. We're working toward the drug court, the healing to wellness court now. And we do have our own police force. They work in cooperation with the RCMP and Ontario and the Sûreté de Quebec. And it's the Akwesasne Mohawk Police Services. So they do charging under our laws. The enforcement is what we're working toward also, because our amps, they work under the criminal code. So enforcement has always been an issue, but we're working toward redrafting some of our laws and modernizing it.
Great, thank you for that. The next question is online, and it's what kind of laws are being adjudicated in the Akwesasne Court, and what would you like to see?
So we have traffic court. We have violations of our community laws being residency, membership code. We have our own membership code. Really, a list of things. We have now a mortgage law that we'll probably be adjudicating. What was the second part of the question?
What ounce would you like to take jurisdiction over, or ounce you'd like to see adjudicated?
We would like to have, what we're working toward now, our child's rights and responsibilities law. That's going to be a major step toward having our court being able to adjudicate a lot more, a lot broader, and also toward criminal charges.
Yes. Okay. So,
Yes.
okay. Currently, no criminal or family.
No.
Yeah. Great. Any other questions? Over, Dwayne.
There we go. Thank you very much, Chief Miigwech. I'm Dwayne Gastanoqua from Tasmanclica Council in the Yukon. We're self-governing First Nation. We signed our agreement in 1993. There was just recently a court case, a Supreme Court case, the Wendake versus Dixon, that talked about the Canadian Charter of Rights. Tasmanclica Council's position always was that the charter doesn't apply to us because we've never agreed to the charter. And that was our position. We were interveners in that court case. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court ruled that the Canadian Charter does apply, and not just to self-governing First Nations, but to Indian Act bands. And so it was quite a concerning decision. They did say, though, that Section 25 exemption may apply. So this is something that I think that maybe the AFN and other bodies should look at, because it's going to impact all First Nations across the country. And this charter applying, and now we got to look at all the laws that we develop and draw. We got to try to look at it with a Section 25 lens, and then we got to see, well, can we apply the Section 25 exemption to these laws? So it just complicates things. But I think the main reason why it went to the Supreme Court is because in Wendake, they didn't have a court system set up where that citizen could have brought their concern, so it could have been resolved internally. So I think that the more of us First Nations, and I think it just put the fire under our feet in the Yukon for all of us to develop courts, to develop administrative tribunals, so our citizens have an avenue to take their concerns, so they don't have to be going to Western courts. But I just wanted to share that with everyone. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that. And I understand Lori has a follow-up question, and then we'll come back to you. Yeah.
In Saskatchewan, some of our First Nations have adopted their own laws, and the issue that we have is enforcement and actually prosecuting. There's no prosecutor who would prosecute the First Nations laws, and that's always been a barrier for First Nations to address the enforcement of the laws. So you have your own prosecutors and judges. I'm just wondering, how do First Nations go about to get funding for that?
There isn't a lot of funding out there. That's what I learned. I always assumed when I was doing specific claims work that we would work, our own court was fully functioning in this broad spectrum. And when I started this role last year, I learned there is not a lot of funding, or the funding that is available, you are under complete direction from the ministry and the federal government to accept any funding. So we actually talked about that last week with the Ministry of Justice in Quebec about developing our Healing to Wellness Court, our drug court, as an alternative to sentencing. And they would be heard on territory by Akwesasne justices. And at the very end, and I was telling this story to my table yesterday, at the very end, everything seemed very peachy. And then they said, well, okay, so all you would need to do for the funding which is available, is to make sure that you're going by our guidelines and you're following with every directive that we would give you in terms of who you can hire as a prosecutor, even right down to sentencing. And that kind of burst my bubble there. And it was something, a lesson that I learned, and I asked my colleagues at the end of the meeting after we unzoomed. So is this typical? Absolutely. So long answer to a good question.
Thank you for that. Do the fines go when you give fines? Do the money go to your nation?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. That was another question. So we have a question in the room, and then we have a question online for Larry over here. Aaron.
Hi, my name is Arturo Calvo. I work for the AFN Yukon Regional Office. My question is for Larry. With the two-eyed seeing approach, I've often observed that First Nation representatives are more equipped to action that concept when it comes to their collaborations with Crown representatives or at meetings with Crown representatives, in large part because it is a concept that First Nations have been working with pretty much since contact. The idea that, you know, the wampum idea of like walking on a parallel path, but never interfering with one another. Whereas when Crown representatives are explaining that concept, they still get stuck on that sort of imagined concept of Crown supremacy. And then you attend meetings that are jointly, where attendants are jointly from Crown governments or First Nations. And while I think they often respect the concept of the two-eyed seeing approach, and very much so in more public meetings, I've often seen that when it comes to actioning things that come out of those discussions, there's a lot of tendency on the part of Canada to retreat back to that sort of assumed Crown authority. So how or what do you recommend when First Nations are confronted with sort of they say one thing at the meeting and then their actions sort of reverse back to that sort of patriarchal Crown authority that has sort of been the status quo for their relationships with First Nations? Thank you.
Great question. Yeah, we're up against a lot of resistance. It's going to take a long time before people recognize that in an ethical space, the whole package has to be upheld. The Indigenous side, and also the numbers game. You know, you've got the population statistics. So what I think is critically important is negotiating governance up front and making whatever gains you can make there, and then a mechanism. And that's why it was so important in Pathways 1 that we opened in ceremony, we closed in ceremony. And, you know, we went over Canada's origin story. By the way, Canadians don't know Canada's origin story. They just don't. And for me, every time I've shared it, I've had people come up to me that I thought, and this includes historians, and they'll say, I've learned so much. Well, that's a heavy imbalance to start with. And I'll tell you, I mean, I admire people like Curtis Skur, who's leading for AFN the Pathways 1 initiative. And you're absolutely right. And he feels that burden because there's high turnover and you're starting from square one. So at least in Pathways 1, there's the history, there's the framework, there's the governance system, and you can remind people. It's not, even then, it's not easy. But if you don't negotiate a governance that's balanced, that allows for oral as well as written, then it's extremely difficult. Although I want to acknowledge, Stephen and I were talking about some of those elders that pioneered this work and the stuff they had to go through. And it was a lot harder than even what we're enduring, but it's going to take a long time before we get to truly what is ethical space. And ethical space is mutual respect. We're not there yet.
Great, thank you for that. Just another quick follow-up. There was a question in the chat for you, Larry. In BC, we don't have a lot of treaties, and we don't obviously have a wampum belt. The person asking, Michelle, is asking the question if she wants to learn more about the wampum belt and the history. What would you suggest would be the best place to start?
Oh, wow.
Recognizing that it's a massive, I think just to start, what would be a place to start?
Rick Hill has done some
Rick Hill, yes.
great work. And Rick and I hunt together. And in fact, he asked me how I was doing yesterday. I've got a meeting with him. I'll be happy to raise that question.
Okay.
And I'm thinking, Albert Marshall and I were at a conference in Fredericton. It's a long story. How do I do it? Bottom line, in 1970, elders were gathered on Manitoulin Island. An elder brought out a box stamped 1701, Montreal Peace Accord. It was missing all its content. The belts had been taken hither and yon, and one elder asked for 7 volunteers, one of whom was William Commanda, and they spent a lifetime looking for those belts. The recipient of many of those is Miriam Moulton. And there's talk among belt keepers of the stories, important stories that are coming from those belts. At the conference, what came out in the belt scanning for Miriam, we're not doing enough for youth. We're talking, but we're not really supporting youth. I just had to throw that one in there.
Yeah, great. So maybe that's a suggestion then for if you're going to talk to Rick Hill, some resources could be emailed, and then it can part of the resource hub and part of that could be sent out to people.
I'd be happy to do that.
That would be great. Thank you for that. And then we have Joseph has the mic.
Hello there. This question is for Elder Larry McDermott. My name is Joseph Tatusis. I did a little bit of work on the Canadian delegation in the past for COP14 in the preparations for that as well, and some work with the Indigenous Caucus. So thank you for all the work that you did. You set the foundation for the work that the AFN does and all of the other Indigenous experts. So thanks for that. My question is in relation to IPCAs. The INAN report on the Standing Committee just released recommendations last month in May, and IPCAs are included quite a lot within that, actually, and land restitution in many forms, right, is being explored. So not just fee simple, not just economic development, not just additions to reserve, but of course, including all of those things. But IPCAs, when it comes to co-management of areas, I work for Coquitlam First Nation. I'm here with our chief, Ron Giesbrecht, who's sitting across from me here at the table. And we're negotiating with the province of BC over co-management of conservation, right, up in the watershed. We're located in the Lower Mainland, so in the Vancouver area. Coquitlam, the city, is named after the First Nation. And when it comes to the territory there, up in the watershed, of course, north of the city where the lakes are, and there's been a dam that's created there, there's a lot of overlapping land use, right? We're looking to get the nation back up into the watershed. And IPCAs might potentially be one of those ways. Of course, there's a lot of work to be done there, but I'm interested to hear if there are examples, maybe in other places in Canada or even around the world, where there's overlapping economic activities. And I know that OECMs, other effective conservation measures, are in a creative way, right, where it's not a national park or a provincial park, but it allows for other activities like traditional land use, hunting, fishing, and all those sorts of things. But when it comes to how First Nations in Canada can negotiate participating in exercising their responsibilities for taking care of the land, are there examples where overlapping economic activities or those types of traditional land uses, like our exercising our Section 35 rights exist.
Right. Although, my mind was thinking globally. And unfortunately, the Sami lost a Supreme Court case 6-5 and would have assumed authority over most of the north of Norway. But I think there's some good examples in the Northwest Territories. And of course, it's with a territorial government, you have different legal framework, sometimes beneficials, sometimes not. But I think on IPCAs, it was. I could actually put you in contact with some people there. I'm also involved in biospheres. The only Indigenous-led biosphere in the world is Satwe in Northwest Territories, which is looking at, the whole business of protecting their land. IPCAs, what frameworks can they use to work for them? So I'd be happy, after this session, I'll give you my card and I'll give you some contacts.
Great. Thank you for that wealth of information. Thank you. So we are at our break time now. So we're going to go to the break. Just talk to the team, and they said that they'll definitely source some resources on the wampum belt. But also, it made me think that if anybody has something that they'd like to share, that would be useful to your other people in the room that are doing the same work that you're doing. If you probably send it to the conference organizers that they can go up on the microsite, that would be really helpful. And we're already building that resource hub if we do that. So we're going to take a 15-minute break, and we're very fortunate to have our keynote, Dr. Wilton Littlechild, up afterwards. So we'll see you back here at 10:30.
We are very fortunate today to have Dr. Wilton Littlechild do his presentation, do the keynote today. We know, of course, I don't know if you need a big, long introduction, but because everybody knows who you are, and appreciate your lifelong work that you've done for all really many aspects of Indigenous people and Indigenous life, and really appreciate that. So we're going to tag team a little bit today. He'll tell me when to do the power or to advance the slides. I'm not usually very good at that, but I'll do my best. Thank you, and turn it over to you.
Thank you. Pardon me. Nikan kake utatam skat no ako magantik. Ito tem tikaste. Tatam hina onge to ano mo. Mustagi ko imam skotamig. Tan sana gets na o yaswon. Tagiswichi ko yak. Paguma. Yawi no skima na kamam skotamakix. Naskumag minata tagikseb kagis most magak. May kant mohte on sigason. Maskochi sikot. Ego, ogma wihon o sauge ungi migo negama wihon. Ekskinanas komt na agakio hatio. That's mosianista. First of all, I wanted to wish you all a happy Indigenous Peoples Day, and also a happy Indigenous Month for all of us to celebrate, I guess. So I wanted to wish you well. I spoke in my language just to acknowledge the time we're in right now, as we are in the second year of the International Decade for Indigenous Languages. So whenever I have an opportunity to acknowledge that occasion, I say a few words in Cree. I just introduced myself with my Cree name is Walking Wolf, and my chief's name in ceremony is Golden Eagle. And I wanted to acknowledge and thank those of you who offered prayers for all of us this morning. And secondly, to acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of these lands and territories, the Huron-Wendat peoples. I wanted to share a PowerPoint with you, but having heard the elder this morning and his presentation, I've tossed it all out except this one page. I was at a conference last week. Some of you may have been in Ottawa during the launching of the Indigenous Month, June, on focusing on history. And I'm going to take the lead from the previous speaker who gave a lot of historical perspective this morning, which I want to relate to and build on with you. That's why I'm tossing. But I do have a PowerPoint that talks about the international legal framework for the topics we're discussing here in relation especially to land. And I'm going to touch on some of that, but also a bit more. I recollected when he mentioned Rio, and this is really going to date myself, but that's okay because I was referring to the last meeting in Ottawa. I was sharing with them, I'm not sure who phoned me, I said, to come and be here with you at this meeting. She said, we want to invite the brightest, the smartest, most good-looking Indian lawyer guy, but he couldn't make it. So we had to invite you. So here you have my picture anyway. I don't know why she put it there, but anyway. So this international legal framework has been developed quite a few years extensively, as you heard. I remember a meeting in Geneva early morning from Morris Strong. And he said, Willie, could we have coffee? Because I've just been appointed to chair the Rio Summit. And I said, sure, I'll join you. So we went and had coffee. And he said, what am I going to do? I said, I don't know. What's your topic? He said, well, environment. Well, I said, you better invite some elders. She said, okay. That's all he wanted to hear, I guess, because he did invite elders. And as you know, a chapter of the Rio outcome is on Indigenous peoples. He also referenced the Convention on Biological Diversity, Article 8, and also the Paris Agreement, all of which I've got some awareness of, sometimes fingerprints on the law. But when he mentioned Article 8J, that's come back to haunt us now recently. Because in the Article 8J, it had included not only specifically Indigenous peoples, but it adds on to say, and local communities. Those three words are now coming back to haunt us because they're using, they meaning states are now using local communities to try and water down the focus on Indigenous peoples. So just a caution there. The current debate on our rights at the international arena. In fact, recently in Rome, there was a meeting of the three mechanisms: the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, UN Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and also the Special Rapporteur had a meeting, and they tabled a report at the last Permanent Forum session in April, a combined position on the use of those words and local communities. So I just wanted to acknowledge that there's an argument coming up against us in the international arena by use of those terms, of those words, local communities. Anyway, what I was going to talk about was the international legal framework with respect to the work you're doing, and I want to thank you very much and commend you for the work you're doing on the creation of a new mechanism on specific claims. And I wanted to discuss with you the international legal framework, because when I saw the questions last night, the 6 questions that were on the screen, I asked myself, what would the answers be to those 6 questions if you used an international law lens to look at those questions? So it came to mind that we have three, perhaps four specific areas we could utilize in answering those questions for possible inclusion. I'm not saying we have to, or it's just a terms of reference we could potentially use, because it's been a long time. A long time, meaning that I'm going to go jump to the third one now. As you see, the ILO convention is when I started on this journey in August. And I'll say by looking at some of you, you weren't even born yet. August of 1977. I was in my office and I got a call from a person that I knew, said to me, Willie, there's going to be a meeting in Sweden and we're looking for a chairperson to cover the topic of the ILO Convention 107. You don't have to answer right away, but I'll call you back because we need a chairperson to lead that discussion. So when she called back, I said, yeah, I'd love to go to Sweden. I don't know about this chairman thing, but what the heck is ILO Convention 107? And here's another bit of information which might inform me as to how back this was. We used to have a thing called a fax machine. Anyway, she said, oh, don't worry about it. I'll fax it to you, she said. ILO Convention 107. So off I went to Geneva, and not Geneva, I'm sorry, Sweden, Kiruna, where the Second World Conference of Indigenous Peoples was being held. And I chaired the discussions on the ILO Convention 107. It's the International Labor Organizations Convention. It was adopted in 1956. At the time was the only internationally legally binding instrument that talked about Indigenous peoples. But it is a labor instrument, labor law. Curious to see, it was like the Indian Act because it talked about education, health, lands, territories, all of that, much like the Indian Act. So the delegations in Kiruna said, this is outdated. We want to update it. So we had the session. The outcome of that discussion was the ILO Convention 169. So after the meetings, they told me, well, Willie, since you chaired this meeting, why don't you take this to Geneva and get the law changed? Okay. So off I went to Geneva and met with the Director General of the ILO, International Labor Organization, asked him, what is the process to have a convention changed or introduced or adopted? So he sat me down. He said, well, here's what you have to do. But I found one thing really curious and interesting, that they have a 2-year process at the ILO for making international law. And it's a tripartite arena. By that, I mean there's 3 votes for adoption of a law. The employees have 1 vote, the employers have 1 vote, and governments have 1 vote. So it doesn't matter how many employees attend or employers attend or governments attend, they have 1/3 of a vote each. So employees like ourselves as Indigenous peoples, we didn't have any business to be there in a sense anyway. But the Canadian Labour Congress offered us 2 seats to go to that meeting. I was one of the 2 and a lawyer from Australia, Indigenous lawyer. So we went to the ILO convention because we wanted to amend 107. And as I said, it's now 169. So we sat there for the 2-year sessions, not the 2 years completed, but the sessions on international law itself, the labor law. So we were successful in getting the ILO Convention 169 adopted to the current state of the law from their perspective. And I wanted to highlight a couple of sections there for you because this is going back to 1977. And it wasn't only till 1988 and 89 that we were able to attend the ILO meetings. So going back to the international legal framework, we also have now, as you know, of course, you know, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And I had the, some say unfortunate, but some say pleasure, others say duty to chair the sections on lands, territories, and resources, the articles on self-determination, and the article on lands, territories, and resources. So it's from that perspective and recollection of those debates that I wanted to share with you the work that's been done internationally in this area, which we could look to when we talk about specific claims and how do we improve that to be an independent mechanism. So I thought these laws might help us in that area. So when you look to the UN Declaration, I'm only going to actually touch on very briefly on the UN Declaration, the American Declaration, the ILO Convention, and also a bit about the Truth and Reconciliation report, because it was referenced last night in your discussions or last afternoon. So to begin with the land sections on the UN Declaration, I wanted to focus really on one article, which is, well, two articles, 25 and 26. So if you could scroll to that slide. Next, please. The Article 25 is really important. In fact, I used it just last week to settle a dispute between an oil company and one of our nations in Alberta. But previous to that, we had other challenges with interpretations of the law, the Canadian law, without regarding the international framework. So Article 25 came in very handy last week, and you see it as Indigenous peoples have the right to maintain and strengthen their distinctive spiritual relationship with their traditionally owned or otherwise occupied and used lands, territories, waters, very importantly, coastal seas, and other resources, and to uphold their responsibilities to future generations in this regard. So I wanted to underscore the word spiritual in that, the spiritual relationship we have to land. And also, because the debates are just, or they're not debates, the second hearing, sorry, hearing is not the right word, second reading of Bill 61, I think it just started, or did just conclude, started on water, as you know. So Article 26 goes on to talk about the use and ownership of our lands. Indigenous peoples have the right to the lands, territories, and resources which they have traditionally owned, occupied, or otherwise used or acquired. Acquired, a word was inserted late in the discussions because some First Nations have had to buy their own land back. So we wanted to make sure that lands that they acquired by purchasing their own land back in many cases would be included in this reference to ownership. Indigenous peoples have the right to own, use, develop, and control the lands, territories, and resources that they possess by the reason of traditional ownership or other traditional occupation or use, as well as those which they have otherwise acquired. And states shall give legal recognition and protection to these lands, territories, and resources. Such recognition shall be conducted with due respect to the customs, traditions, and land tenure systems of the Indigenous peoples concerned. Now, I thought these two articles of the UN Declaration were really appropriate and zeroing in on the work that you're doing with regard to an independent mechanism going forward. So I just wanted to share that with you, and I apologize for reading it to you, but I understand there's some people online as well. So if we go to the OAS, I'm going to jump forward to the OAS Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So if we go, but it's going to have to be fast because these are all the sections on land and so on. There we go. So you'll see that it was a quick flip through it, but all those are related to lands, territories, and resources of the UN Declaration. You may have noted in your documents, you referenced Article 27 and 40, 27, 28. I think when you consider the declaration, sometimes there's a tendency to look at only one article and not a cluster of articles. So when you take a look at conflict resolution mechanisms and also redress, you need to look at Article 27, 28, and 40 together as a cluster. And that gives you the framework for a conflict resolution mechanism. I just thought because you have referenced them in your documents. Reason I wanted to draw your attention on the OAS declaration is that it's a more recent adopted declaration. It improves on the UN declaration. We never said that the UN declaration was perfect when we adopted it after 27 years in Geneva and 12 more in New York. So 39 years it took us from day one in August 1977 to get to Canada finally adopting. But importantly, by the way, when they adopted the UN declaration at the UN in New York, they added the words without qualification. Canada now supports and endorses the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples without qualifications. Very important. I think we note that. So when you look at the UN Declaration then on the lands, territories, and resources, the OAS Declaration, first of all, you all know that the UN Declaration is global. The OAS Declaration is regional. It applies to North, Central, and South America. So that's important because we were able to improve on the UN Declaration at the OAS. Only took us 12 years, but that's okay. At least it was improved. We built on the UN Declaration. We said the UN Declaration is the floor, not the ceiling. And we're going to improve it at the OAS because Canada, US being a part of the Americas. Because in the Geneva discussions, Australia and New Zealand, what it became the Kansas states, Canada, New Zealand, United States, Australia, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, US, Kansas states, they work together at the UN and also in Washington with the American Declaration. And you all know that they voted against the UN Declaration after 27 years of discussions. And many times they were sitting right beside me when we were having discussions at the UN. And when I was asked by the media what I thought when the vote came down in New York, I said, I feel totally betrayed. Did they intend all along to vote against this UN Declaration? Because when the 4 red lights went on, it was very clear who those red lights were in the vote. And there were 11 abstentions, if you recall. But the OAS Declaration actually improves on the UN Declaration. In the lands article, for example, if you go to the next slide, Article 25 It's actually building on the UN Declaration, so you'll see similar wording. Indigenous peoples have the right to maintain and strengthen their distinctive spiritual, cultural, and material relationship with their lands, territories, and resources, and to uphold their responsibilities to preserve them for themselves and for future generations. So you see some additional words there that expand on the spiritual relationship from the UN Declaration. Secondly, Indigenous peoples have the right to the lands, territories, and resources which they have traditionally owned, occupied, and otherwise used or acquired. Indigenous peoples have a right to own, use, develop, and control the lands, territories, and resources that they possess by reason of traditional ownership or other traditional occupation or use, as well as those which they have otherwise acquired. So that's basically building on the UN Declaration. If you go to the next slide, states shall give legal recognition and protection to these lands, territories, and resources. Such recognition shall be conducted with due respect to the customs, traditions, and land tenure systems of the Indigenous peoples concerned. The phrase land tenure systems was a real battle to get included in that subparagraph. And then, of course, Indigenous peoples have the right to legal recognition of the various and particular modalities and forms of property, possession, and ownership of their lands, territories, and resources in accordance with the legal system of each state and the relevant international instruments. Relevant international instruments, by the way, includes treaties. States shall establish special regimes appropriate for such recognition and for their effective demarcation or titling. The last part of that is really for other states in Central South America, where they have a titling system for traditional territories, and they demarcate territories in a way, I guess, similar to the reserves, or US, they call them reservations, but nevertheless, demarcation. So this was the OAS article. But if you look at the treaty article, for example, on treaty lands, the UN Declaration talks about honor and respect, but very importantly, because we don't use this enough, I don't think, Article 37 of that UN Declaration calls for honoring and respect and enforcement of treaties. That word is not used a lot in the discussions on the UN Declaration. Yes, the people argue, yeah, we all agree that we honor your treaties, we'll respect your treaties, but enforcement isn't focused on too much. So that goes into the discussion at the OAS. At the UN, we couldn't convince states to include what our elders wanted included in Article 37. They wanted the words treaties to be enforced according to the original spirit and intent and as understood by Indigenous peoples. We couldn't get that in because many states, if you recall, at the UN, there's only 70 countries really that have Indigenous peoples admittedly in their territories, or they occupy their territories. So many states who didn't have treaties said, well, we don't have to assist with your discussions. So we had to garner their support. Yes, you may not have treaties. So it was agreed to that inclusion of agreements would be inserted into the article. And some people said, well, we don't have agreements. We don't have Indigenous peoples, but we have contracts, they said. So the two words constructive arrangements were added onto the article. So now it has the treaties, agreements, and constructive arrangements in Article 37. to be more inclusive. For example, the James Bay Treaty at the time was being discussed. So a treaty went in to be inclusive. And those that didn't have treaties or agreements could feel comfortable in voting for it if the terms constructive arrangements were added into it. We felt that it was an attempt to water down the treaty Article 27. And some states did. As a matter of fact, I remember one meeting, I shouldn't talk about this, but I was chairing the meeting on Article 37, and this guy puts up his hand. Mr. Chairman, I really like the term you're inserting in here about spirit and intent. I said, yes, that's what our elders talk about, the original spirit and intent of our people. He said, yeah, we like it too, because our spirit and intent was to steal all your land. I said, wait a minute now, we're not going there. So anyway, that was part of the discussion. So if we go to the OAS article, which we just did, article on treaty, that's where we inserted because it only applies in the Americas and other states aren't having to worry about it. Articles 23, I believe it is, for the OAS Declaration now includes those first three segments: honor, respect, and enforcement of treaties. But it goes on to say, according to the true intent and as understood by Indigenous peoples. So we finally got what our elders wanted to the states and the world, they said, to understand about our treaties, that it's important that our understanding of treaty. So in ceremony, they talk about the 4 elements of treaty. Yes, of course, the written text of treaty. And unfortunately, almost everybody only looks at the written text. But in ceremony, they talk about the oral testimony, how we understand treaty in our languages, our various languages. They talk about the third element being the ceremonial or spiritual element of treaty. Because as you know, for example, we have a flag song, we have a treaty pipe ceremony, we have the role of the horse in treaty time. In our ceremonies, that's all included. There's a song, treaty song, about the treaty flag. And in English, it talks about treaties last so long as the flag ought to be wave or wave in the winds, fly waves in the winds. That's a Cree part of the flag song. And the other one you all know about, the sun, so long as the sun shines, the grass grows and the rivers flow. By the way, the court case in London, I was involved with that court case in London on Section 35. We fought against Canada, arguing that they should not be allowed to patriate the Canadian Constitution until and unless Aboriginal and treaty rights were protected in the Constitution. I was sent to court in London, and I remember clearly the first day I woke up and I said to myself, okay, the last thing the elders told me was, Willie, don't screw up. Because if you do, you're screwing up everybody across the country. I said, no pressure. So I'm sitting here, and again, just like the fax machine, young people, we used to have a thing called yellow pages. So I looked at the yellow pages, and it said barristers and solicitors. I looked, and there's an interesting name. So I phoned the office, and I made an appointment. Got up early the next morning. I went to catch a lorry, as they call them, a taxi to this office, and it had Oppenheimer and Company, just CO. Oppenheimer and Co., they say there. So I walked in, and the secretary said, yes, sir, can I help you? And I said, yeah, I have an appointment at 9:30. And she said, with who? And I said, well, first of all, I have a case from Canada. I need the best lawyer you got here because we're fighting against Canada. And she said, have you gone to a barrister? I said, what do you mean? You're a law officer, aren't you? He said, no, you have to talk to a solicitor first and then a barrister after. So we're a solicitor. Luckily, you came here. Who do you want to see? And I said, well, I see your senior partner here might be Mr. Oppenheimer. Can I see him? She said, what? Mr. Oppenheimer. Are you sure? She said, yes, I want the best lawyer you've got. Mr. Oppenheimer. I said, yeah, okay. I'm going to ask you the last time. Are you sure you want to talk? He said, yes. Well, sir, Mr. Oppenheimer's been dead for over 200 years. I didn't realize that whoever started the firm, they keep the name. So I could hear the words, Willie, don't screw up. So we were in court in front of all people, in front of Lord Denning. Lawyers in the audience will, of course, heard about Lord Denning. He took this case on as the last case he would ever decide as a master of the rolls, I think they called him, to take this case on, and then he retired with this case. But after 8 months of court in London, he concludes his decision with a very interesting statement. He said, Indigenous peoples, well, actually, he didn't say that. The Indians in Canada shouldn't have any reason to lose trust in Canada. But if they do, they can always come back. And my decision shall last so long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the rivers flow. That's how he concludes his decision there in London, which was really interesting. Because as you know, it was kind of a win-win decision that Lord Denning rendered in London. Thankfully, he wasn't aware of my lack of experience by asking for a dead person to represent us. But there were 5 of us on this side, and there's 27 lawyers on the other side representing Canada. So I think we did all right. But that was London, and I want to go back now to the ILO convention, because that's where we started. So if you jump to ILO convention 169, just keep going. Right. These are all sections to land, by the way, on the. So if you look at the ILO convention, and next slide, please. Now this is going back now to 1977, fast forward to 1988 and 99. The part on land in the ILO convention, if you look at paragraph 2, the use of the term lands in articles 15 and 16 shall include the concept of territories, which covers the total environment of the areas which the peoples concerned occupy or otherwise use. So this was the drafting back in 1977 to get into the ILO convention. So the word territories is important there because it includes treaty territories. And the environment, the total environment, includes the discussion we had earlier with the elder talking about the environment. I remember Article 28 debates in Geneva on the environment. States were taking a position that nobody has a right to environment. And we asked the old man if he could address the UN. So he said, yes, I will. I'll be happy to address the UN. And it was on whether or not a right to environment was such a thing. So he went up there, and some of you may have heard me in Ottawa a couple of weeks ago talk about this story. And he said to the audience, presidents, ambassadors, heads of state of the world, who among you is going to argue for my brother, the birds that fly? Who is going to argue for my brother, the fish that swims in the waters? Who is going to argue for clean air and clean water? Well, you could hear a pin drop. And it was after that, about a week later, that states started talking about climate change. It's interesting. And when I look back at the June month of June, History Month, and I was trying to list what were the 10 most important contributions of Indigenous peoples to humankind in all these years of discussion at the UN in Washington and New York. So I have a list of 10 most important contributions of Indigenous peoples to the world. Because I saw a statement from a law professor in the United States who said, I've studied the 10 worst cases in the United States courts, Supreme Court of the US, against Indigenous peoples. 10 worst cases against Indigenous persons, against cases against Indigenous peoples. And I've just reread those 10 cases with the lens of the UN Declaration. And all those 10 cases we lost, we would have won if the UN Declaration was in effect at the time. So I thought, okay, that's a real interesting conclusion. So I said, what were the 10 most important contributions we have made? Tell you one quick story from Elder's story before. I was asked by the caucus to go and ask the chairperson if we could open a meeting with a prayer. She said, Mr. Littlechild, you know we don't pray at the United Nations. I said, well, it's actually an invocation, a thanksgiving. She said, and how long is that going to take? Said, you have 3 minutes. So I went back to the caucus. I said, yes, we can start the meeting with a prayer. And just as Great Spirit works mysteriously, 4 elders had brought their drums, hand drums. So we gave them protocol and we asked them if they could open a meeting at the UN with a prayer. So they were happy. They were given the floor and they lined up against the wall. There were 4 drums and they're singing a prayer song. Hey, 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 Mr. Littlechild, how long is this going to? It's 7 minutes already. I said, let him finish, let him finish. So I tell you that story because the UN was used to doing rights in 2 bundles, economic, social, and cultural rights, and civil and political rights. But the day after that song, like after the elder who talked about contributions of Indigenous people to climate change discussions and right to environment, states now, and we'd open every meeting with a prayer at the UN. And guess what? There's a 6th bundle of rights now, a new one, spirituality. So now there's economic, social, and cultural rights, civil and political, and spiritual rights. Spiritual right is a contribution by our elders to the world in terms of recognition. And talking about recognition, the OAS declaration, and I'll stop here, now includes, under international law, recognition of Indigenous family. Because they didn't know such a thing as an extended family, concept of extended family. So the OAS has an article on Indigenous family. It has an article on Indigenous languages. And guess what? It has an article on Indigenous laws. So now Indigenous laws under international law are recognized through the OAS declaration, and so is spirituality. So those are 4 specific improvements to the UN declaration. So when we talk about land or laws or languages, we should include the OAS declaration in our discussions. And that's why when I was looking at those 6 questions last night, maybe if we create this new independent body for specific claims, we should reference these instruments, the UN declaration, which you already talked about, include the OAS declaration, but also specifically refer to the recognition of Indigenous laws under international law. Thank you very, very much.
Wow, thank you so much. I think we probably could have kept listening to you for hours and hours. You probably would have got a bit tired, but we would have thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you so much for that. I don't know if anybody, I'll give the floor to one question. If only one person, one question. If anybody has a question.
30 seconds.
Only have 30 seconds, he says.
None, so I'll add on the last point. Then, if you remember the TRC report that was tabled June 2015, we highlighted 10 principles of reconciliation. By the way, there's now an adoption of those 10 principles of reconciliation from the TRC of Canada. They've been adopted by the Human Rights Council as a global principles for truth and reconciliation. Another contribution, I would say, Indigenous peoples made to the world, because now they've adopted the 10 principles of reconciliation that TRC proposed to, through the Human Rights Council, globalize those principles of reconciliation. And I say that because the first principle, if you remember, is to adopt the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as a framework for reconciliation. So when we talk about going forward in these discussions, that's another supporting, I guess, group of decisions that we asked ourselves, what were the 10 main teachings that we heard over these 6.5 years of discussions at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission? So the first one, of course, was to use the UN Declaration as a framework, but now I would add on the OAS Declaration to that discussion. And when we were drafting the Specific Claims Tribunal Act, we didn't have the fortune of these OAS and the UN Declaration and the TRC report. So now we could utilize those, I think, in terms of reference to create this new independent body, which would be fair is what I'm trying to say, for our peoples. So thank you again for taking so much of your time to share with me. Hi.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you to you. I think your contributions as well, I mean, talking about contributions people have made to the world and to Indigenous people, you are a key player in that. And all of us, thank you for all of the work you continue to do. I know the chat is filled with all kinds of thank yous as well. So very appreciative of you. And I know it can be a bit difficult for you to travel. So really appreciate you being here in person. And I know you have your Oilers shirt on as well. So I'll say, go Oilers, go. Oh, just wait. Do you want to do the questions? Okay. All right. I've just been told. Go ahead.
By the way, those of you who may be watching the game, you'll see me give a land acknowledgement. That's about this stuff, by the way.
Yeah.
Acknowledging the land.
It's been great. Even though I'm from Vancouver and your Oilers defeated my Canucks, though I'm actually really a Habs fan, but that's a different story. I appreciated seeing you every time at the beginning of every game. So thank you for that. Somebody just told me that there is a question in the chat, but I have no idea. Oh, Mark. Yes, Mark has a question as well. There's Mark, and then there's a question in the chat, and we'll do only those two questions.
First of all, I'd like to thank you, Willie, for the and it's given us a road that we can begin putting in front of us in terms of the work that we need to do. There's one small question I do. What it was number 4 in the elements of treaty? I missed that. And I'll finish by saying that the comment is really to all the technicians and the leadership in the room, is that we now have an interface on the work and presentation that Willie has given us on how we can begin the work on developing our own law, and how the basis of that argument will be presented on why we have this traction, I call it, to move forward and to sit with the government and say, this is where we're coming from.
Yes, thank you very much for reminding me. I forgot totally the fourth element of treaty according to the elders in ceremony. Of course, we said the written oral testimony, the sacred or spiritual ceremonial part of treaty. The last one was the legal element. In other words, what have courts said about treaty? And of course, there's principles of those court decisions as well. So, sorry, I didn't mention the legal element of the treaty, which is the fourth element. What have the courts said about treaty? Thank you for that reminder and oversight. Apologize.
Thank you for that. Okay, we will go to the question. Oh, Nanai Rose has shown up. Great to have you today. I don't know how I'm going to hear her question. Can somebody read out her question? This is a person online chat.
Tansagina, can anyone hear me?
We can hear you.
Hi, my name on paper is Rose McLeod, and my traditional name is Wapasqua Mahigan Masquadorum Nehio Anishinaabe Isque from Guineseo Sipi. My question is for Dr. Littlechild. I was just wondering through all these discussions if anybody has considered bringing up our Iron Confederacy and addressing some of our laws to be enforced on our territory.
I'm sorry, I don't know that.
Which
part of it.
confederacy? I missed it as well.
The Iron,
The Iron Confederate, the Iron Confederacy was the first confederacy which the UN modeled.
Yeah.
They got their idea from our confederacy. It was like the original United Nations here on Turtle Island.
yes, there's been some
I'm
discussions.
just wondering if that,
Sorry. There are discussions about the historical aspect of that. I don't mean historical in a negative way by any means. But it is, I don't know if it has been at this table because I haven't been participating in these, and apologize for my lack of participation in this arena. But there has been some references to that Iron Confederacy, like the Great Law of Peace has been discussed as well. Because those are significant contributions, like those 10 that I mentioned, to the global community.
Thanks for that. We have, I think, Nanai Rose on
like I say,
Zoom. Can we make sure that it's her that's pinned and speaking? That'll be our last question. Oh,
Hello?
hello?
I wasn't sure you'd be able to hear me.
Yeah. Are you Rose?
Yes, Nani Rose.
Okay, thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Sanaitla, Gina Ilgu Tulang Adan, Hanu Had Kithka Dikian, Rose Lockyer Yacht today, Hanu Dikiagan, Outlagaze do di Iskagagan, di Chichkitne Gagan, Ayat di Gutne Lagan. Hello, my name is Rose Lockyer. My Haida name translates to one we waited so long for. I'm from Outlagay, Haida Bwai, and I'm Chichkitne Eagle Clan. It's not so much a question as a concern of the state of affairs. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge and thank everybody in the room and anyone that helped put this meeting together. I think it's incredibly important that these discussions happen and that Indigenous law be recognized with the seriousness and force that needs to go behind it to push it through. I currently reside in unceded and surrendered Algonquin territory known as Odawa, and it's been my personal experience that the federal, provincial, and municipal governments are not taking what they agree to and putting it into practice when they move forward in day-to-day things. And it's my feeling across the land that they're just creating busy work for a lot of us to do, with the beautiful dream of the commission yesterday that was discussed, and then to hear that it may not even happen if it doesn't go through legislation is really disheartening. Our people are in crises across the land. We're losing our language keepers, our knowledge keepers, our elders, our grandmothers, our grandfathers, and our young people have lost hope. And that's incredibly apparent in the addictions and the suicides. We don't have time to wait for these things to be pushed through. Every time we get close, the federal government changes the rules, changes the laws. We cannot continue to play their game by their rules. The first AFN general meeting that I went to was, our chiefs didn't even have a chance to speak. There was an arbitrary 3-minute timer, and I understand that time and resources are limited for us as well when we gather, but we must come together in a good way and give everybody a chance to speak. That is our way. And we speak and we come to a consensus as long as it takes. It's horrifying. They continue to rape and pillage our Mother Earth with no heed to our rights, our inherent Indigenous laws that supposedly are there to protect us. They use the RCMP as thugs to hold our people at gunpoint. Our women and children continually put themselves in harm's way to protect our people and our land. And I'm asking this beautiful room and gathering of all these brilliant minds to focus on that solution, because time is of the essence. We will run out of time. And there are nations that will go extinct if we don't act faster than this. We cannot wait for their timelines. I appreciate your willingness to hear me speak. Jaha'a.
Thank you very much. I share in the pain that you've just expressed to us. In my community, for a period of 8 days recently, we had 18 deaths. Most of them were from drug overdose, most of them young people. Yes, some have lost the hope that you talk about. So we're not waiting anymore. What we've done through our constitution is 2 things. We've declared Cree to be the official language in my territory. We've adopted the UN Declaration and the OAS Declaration, Convention on the Rights of the Child, and other international laws as being applicable in our territory through our own legislation. So I agree with you. We don't have time to waste or spare or wait, but we could be and can be proactive in the enforcement of treaty, for example, and that's what we're trying to do. But I do share the pain that you've just expressed with us. I was in a room one time. I asked the grade 8 students, "How are you doing, guys?" I was supposed to talk to the young people, and they said, "Well, we're just waiting to die." They said, "Waiting to die." "Yeah, we've lost hope. There's no future for us," they said, the young people, grade 8 class. Then I go to a prison to visit inmates, and with bright eyes, one of them says to me, "You know what? I hope I get out of here one day, because I'm going to change my life." So that hope you express has different kinds, I'm sure, of support through the pain that you've just expressed with us. And I share that with you. Thank you for doing that. Hi, hi.
Great. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for the last comment too. I think it's probably how a lot of us feel and how a lot of us and why we do the work that we do and ensuring that the next generation does have hope and that we do make change. Yeah, it's in some ways a kind of sad way to end. But it is a reminder to remember that, you know, our people, and I think that's probably another thing for all of us to understand, that who are not Indigenous is particularly, is that this is our lived experience. This work that we're doing is for our people, for our communities, for our nations, for the future of our children. And all of the consequences, all of the barriers, and all of the delays are things that we live with on a daily, which is different than being a non-Indigenous Canadian and just going to work and doing your job. Having said that, that doesn't mean that we're not all in this together and that we all have to do this together, because if my children don't succeed, no one's children are going to succeed. And we want to have a better, stronger country. We definitely need all of us to succeed. And I just hope that's one of the takeaways. And we will be having some closing reflections from Chief Silver. If he can make his way up here, that would be great. But yeah, really appreciate everything that you've done. Appreciate your commitment. Appreciate you work all the time. You do incredible stuff. And you know, I think all of us probably want to be like you when we grow up. So really thank you for that. And thank you for making the effort to come today. And I know, again, online and in the room, I'm certain I speak for everybody when they are very grateful for everything that you've done. Thank you very much. Just sit in the chair with the hand mic. You want to stand up? Yeah. Okay.
Tradition, Corey.
Just wait for
Oh, yeah, definitely. One of our boys played with them.
Oh, good.
Clayton, he's playing pro in Austria right now.
Oh, awesome.
He's got tryouts in Sweden and
Wow.
Finland in August. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Corey, and need to thank Willie Littlechild for the words he shared, and everyone else. Lamhailtuch is my name. I'm Dalton Silver. I'm chief of the Sumath peoples, or Sumas First Nation, back in BC. We're of the Stalo people, of the Salish people. Some say Co-Salish, some say the Salish are all one, and that was the teachings of our elders. Cover a good part of Washington State and southern British Columbia, as well as the interior. But I want to thank the hosts here, the Hurons here at Wendat, and you know, being asked to follow up to such a group of knowledge keepers, the knowledge that was shared. One of the federal representatives was sitting in the back with myself earlier and said that, you know, the last couple of days could be comprised into a really good course for university students to spread that knowledge. I think the way I'll approach this, I said to somebody, to Jody, that in being asked to follow up in this manner and sitting through the sessions here in the Coast Salish way, it's like being asked to witness. When we have work in our territories, we have work in our longhouses, there's a certain work that needs to be done, and people are asked to witness at the beginning. We'll have a speaker on the floor that will go and ask the witnesses to remember the work that was being done in this house that we're gathered in. And some are asked to respond at the end to the work that was being done. And the way I was brought up, I think that's best approach I can take. I want to say too that, you know, I'm so thankful for the opening prayers, for the songs and the dance that were done before. That's a protocol, I think, that goes along with the Snawayath in our language, the teachings of our people that form the laws that we have, the laws of our lands, the laws of our territories. And the drum songs we say, those bring our ancestors to be here with us, to give everyone strength for the work it is that we need to do for our people at home. You know, there were many perspectives shared about our lands, about our territories, and the injustices of our lands being taken from us. I sit on other committees too, and people talk about hunting and fishing as formerly, as said in many, many treaties, where those rights are being denied. It's happening in our territories. Where I come from, we have no treaty. So many of our people say unceded territory. I had to step out for a little bit to report back to the chiefs at the Union of BC Indian Chiefs Assembly on specific claims on what's going on here. And I encourage the chiefs there to keep up the fight. I heard our ancestors were into this years and years ago. Where I lived, there was a lake drained. That was our food source. It was our food security that had every species of salmon, had crayfish, had eels, had sturgeon, freshwater mussels. And now we're fighting to prevent that lake to come back with our neighbors, to protect the farmland, and in the interest of public safety. And in entering that agreement with Washington State, with the province of British Columbia, with the cities and the territories and the southern tribes, our neighbors in Nooksack and Lummi, I said, we're going against our teachings to fight nature. I said, it's ironic that we're doing this in the interest of food security and of public safety. It's 100 years ago that lake was taken from us. That was our lifeblood. That was our food security. I had talks with some friends from the plains, from the prairies, who said their food source was taken as well. There's a systemic injustice that has happened that I think we're trying to address. And by putting in our perspectives, our Snawayath, the teachings that we have, and I hear everyone here talking about that, the perspectives from Quebec region. We had the welcome from the Grand Chief that I'm thankful for, and from the regional chief. And you know, in the old way, that's endorsing the work that we're gathered here doing on behalf of our people. I hear Stephen Augustine talking about that connection, talking about the holistic perspective and others, and the meaning and how deep it is for our people, the feelings that our people have had in the past about losing our lands, losing our territories, for the newcomers to reap the benefits of the resources on our lands. And in the teachings of our people, And I've heard it expressed here by many of the speakers in one way or another. Resources is a new term. Our old people said all our relations, our brothers and sisters, everything that lives around us. I mentioned my name earlier. Lamhailtuch. I'm Chwamuch, Mistimuch. You hear the similarities. The earth we speak of, the Tamach, the sacred paint we use is the Tamach as well. The Chwamuch, Mistimuch, peoples of the land, the Tamach, the land. We talked, someone said last night when we were having dinner, Mukhia. And that makes you kind of smile. That's a part of the anatomy. That's your navel, your belly button. But you see the Mukhia, the Chwamuch, Mistimuch, the Tamuch, they're all connected. Your Mukhia is your connection to your mother. So the old languages are important, our people's languages. I was happy to hear from Akwesasne, from Kanawage, and others about standing up, asserting yourselves on your lands. Many of us are starting that, and some of us have been for a while. Komkomelak, my brother back there, we were talking last night about some of the battles we had in years past with fisheries and oceans in our territories and being surrounded by snipers and having a big helicopter circle around us. RCMP showing this big, huge gun with their door wide open, circling down over us. We were unarmed. We were standing up for a right to gather food for our peoples. The sustenance sustained us for thousands and thousands of years. That's something that was never, ever legally taken from us by anyone's law. Not by treaty, not by British common law, not by international law, or by our own Snowiath, our Indigenous laws. These are things that we need to address for our people at home. I heard the grandmother from Haida Gwaii right at the end there. That kind of sums it up, I think. That's one of the reasons why we're doing the things we do. A lot of us are so busy, we travel all over the place trying to address these things. But I think, all in all, I just want to thank everyone for the input here. I sit on the Chiefs Committee on Lands, Territories, and Resources. And when I was sitting in the back there, I was thinking, that's all our relations. I see Ken Young here. I want to acknowledge you. A lot of work he's done in the legal battles for our people over the years, over the decades. And there are many of us, young and old, young warriors I've met just recently that are picking up the fight now. I heard my late grandfather talking about being at this for over 40 years. And that was in the 1970s, saying he hadn't got anywhere yet, talking the land claims issues. And here we are, we're over 40 years after that, and we're talking about the same thing. We don't want to pass on that legacy. We want to get some movement from the federal government, incorporate some of what we're talking about, the values of the land that are not just all monetary. There is a push where I come from about settlement agreements regarding the lost lands from our old reserves, including land back. That's what a lot of our people are talking about at home. Incorporate the idea of some land back. The spiritual and the cultural connections we have can't be easily understood by the newcomers to our territories. But I hear it today and yesterday amongst the delegates here, it's still alive and well. And we'll continue those practices. And we need the lands, the territories, we need all our relations to be able to carry on and maintain our identities as who we are. And I've said to others in other forums that we have not taken the time to get to know one another. The newcomers to our territories barely even know us, just scratching the surface as to who we are as a people. On the other hand, too, we haven't had a whole lot of interaction to get to know them. And we're starting some of that at home, I think, some interactions to get to know one another a little better. If we can put our heads together and move forward in a good way to create a better place for the future generations, for those that aren't here yet, I think we're going in the right direction. I just want to say I'm thankful for all the work that everyone is doing, and I'm honored to be amongst you and to be a part of it. Haichka Siam Siayas Reisia. There's one thing. I want to thank Corey for the great job she's done, and the staff here for trying to keep us in line.
It was a good job, a good task. So just a few closing things. Thank you for that, Chief Silver. Really appreciate that. Just a couple things. There is a lunch outside, so you can either eat your lunch here or there's takeaway containers as well that you can take your lunch if you have to go right away. There will be a summary report of this meeting as there was of the last meeting. And we ask you to share any additional comments, and you can send the email to lands@afn.ca. And I note that Dr. Littlechild did address or look at the 6 questions yesterday. So we encourage all of you to look at those 6 questions and send in your thoughts, send in your comments. Because again, the more we do this, the more work we we'll move faster along as well. So really appreciate that. And I will bring Aaron up here, but I really enjoyed meeting you, those of you that I chatted with in the hallway, and just being here and hearing the conversations. I think we're moving in the right direction. We do need to make sure we're not taking 40 years to finish what we need to do. And I do think, as Dalton said, all our relations, we're all in this together. So how do we figure out how to move this forward in a way that will benefit all of us, in a way that is open, honest, transparent, and really just gets down to action? Because we have all of the information, we have all of the knowledge that we need, we have gazillions of pages of reading, of documentation, of evidence, of all of these things. We know we were here first. We know we were here first in very complex, sophisticated systems of governance, jurisdictions, laws, all of these things, cultures, tradition. Appreciate also Dr. Littlechild's comment around spirituality. And we're here to help get to know you better and to figure out how we can move forward together. And so we need to start at that point and start on actions and not just talking. So really appreciate it. Thank you. And we'll have Aaron come up.
Hello, everyone. Before we move to our closing protocols, I just want to say a couple of really quick words on behalf of the AFN. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Aaron Asselstein. I'm the AFN Director of Lands. I'm extremely privileged to have had the opportunity as a settler Canadian to learn and grow at the AFN and learn from the Assembly, and to participate in gatherings like this. And to do what I can behind the scenes with my team to help and push things forward by taking your direction. So a couple of quick acknowledgements before we get to our protocols. I want to thank the Huron-Wendat Nation for hosting us on their territory, for Wendake for allowing us to come here in this beautiful hotel, this beautiful space. It's been, I think, a great venue for this meeting. I also want to thank everyone who's here today and who's here yesterday, both online and in the room. We will continue to hold these meetings. We held one last year. We're holding one this year. We're going to continue to do it. We think it's very important, and we've heard that here as well.
I want to thank our Council of Experts on Indigenous Laws for their leadership, their support in guiding us in putting these together, and thank our wonderful presenters as well. And lastly, and certainly not least, I do want to thank Corey, our MC, for guiding us over the couple of days, and you've done a great job, and we're in great hands. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll invite the dancers in now to lead us in our closing protocols, and I wish everyone a wonderful rest of their day. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Jesse, can you just help me move?
Hi, everybody. Joan is going to send around 2 guest books and encourage you to write your thoughts. Thank you.
That was not my fault, right?
Kwe Kweyaweti, Arusen Yati, Wendat Indi, Wendake Indare, Oskenoton, Hiwayi Tsukuta. Kwe, bonjour, je m'appelle Arusen Groslouis, je suis Wendat. Vous m'avez vu hier en tant que danseuse de jingle. Donc aujourd'hui, je vais vous faire la prière en Wendat. Lorsque je vais dire yo, vous pouvez répondre yo si vous êtes aussi en accord avec ce que je viens d'énoncer. Donc, je vais dire en Wendat et ensuite je vais translate, je vais traduire en français. Onhwa et Kwaties. Maintenant, nous nous assemblons. Oniwa Wiherentsi et Oniwa ton Winsek. Nous avons l'obligation, nous continuerons d'avoir de la gratitude. À Tikwanoron Kwanyon ne Onhwe. Nous nous saluons et nous nous remercions comme peuple. Onhwa, Tony Hwa, Indionrat. Maintenant, nous n'avons qu'un même esprit. Hyo. A Tikwanoron Kwanyon ne Oniwen du Wen Onwen Tsa. Nous la remercions, la Mère Terre. Onhwa, Tony Hwa, Indionrat. Maintenant, nous n'avons qu'un même esprit. Hyo. A Kaekwanoron Kwanyon de Atiden Kwaronyon. Nous les remercions, les eaux. Onhwa, Tony Hwa, Indionrat. Maintenant, nous n'avons qu'un même esprit. Hyo. A Kaekwanoron Kwanyon de Atewen son Takye. Nous les remercions, tous les poissons. Onhwa, Tony Hwa, Indionrat. Maintenant, nous n'avons qu'un même esprit. Hyo. A Kaekwanoron Kwanyon de Hatewen Ru Tahye, Shiaha, Teyahon Tahye. Nous les remercions, toutes les herbes et les arbrisseaux. Onhwa, Tsoni Hwa, Indionrat. Maintenant, nous n'avons qu'un même esprit. Hyo. A Kaekwanoron Kwanyon de Hatewahi Hahye. Nous les remercions, les fruits. A Taekwanoron Kwanyon de Tishont. Nous les remercions, la fraise. Onhwa, Tsoni Hwa, Indionrat. Maintenant, nous n'avons qu'un même esprit. Hyo. A Kaekwanoron Kwanyon de Hateyaron Tahye. Nous les remercions, les arbres. A Tikwanoron Kwanyon de Wata. Nous les remercions, l'érable. Onhua, Tsonihua, Indionrat. Maintenant, nous n'avons qu'un même esprit. Hyo. Kaekwanoronkwanyon de Atiyo. Nous les remercions, les animaux sauvages. Tikwanoronkwanyon de Oskenoton. Nous le remercions, le chevreuil. Onhua, Tsonihua, Indionrat. Maintenant, nous n'avons qu'un même esprit. Hyo. Kaekwanoronkwanyon de Atiyes. Nous les remercions, les oiseaux. Onhua, Tsonihua, Indionrat. Maintenant, nous n'avons qu'un même esprit. Hyo. Tikwanoronkwanyon de Tionhenhui. Nous les remercions, tout ce qui vit et nous nourrit et nous maintient en vie. Onhua, Tsonihua, Indionrat. Maintenant, nous n'avons qu'un même esprit. Hyo. Tikwanoronkwanyon de Yokwas. Nous le remercions, le vent. Onhua, Tsonihua, Indionrat. Maintenant, nous n'avons qu'un même esprit. Hyo. Tekwanoronkwanyon de Ino, Shoniwa Shiutaha. Nous le remercions, celui qui fait le tonnerre, notre grand-père. Tikwanoronkwanyon de Wendake Yandisha, Soniwa Hien Aha. Nous le remercions, le soleil, notre frère aîné. Onhua, Tsonihua, Indionrat. Maintenant, nous n'avons qu'un même esprit. Hyo. Tikwanoronkwanyon de Wansontahe Yandisha, Oniwa Shiutaha. Nous la remercions, la lune, notre grand-mère. Onhua, Tsonihua, Indionrat. Maintenant, nous n'avons qu'un même esprit. Hyo. Taekwanoronkwanyon Aweti, a Oniwa, Indiara. Senik a Honren Ahon. Nous les remercions, tous ceux qui nous aident pendant la vie. Taekwanoronkwanyon de Ati Hyondaskehen. Nous les remercions, les ancêtres. Taekwanoronkwanyon de Ati Hyonhwanes. Nous les remercions, les aînés. Onhua, Tsoniha, Indionrat. Maintenant, nous n'avons qu'un même esprit. Hyo. Taekwanoronkwanyon de Yaroya He Indare Soniwaha Tisha I. Nous le remercions, celui qui vit au ciel, le Créateur. Onhua Ayara Shihi. Maintenant, nous avons conclu notre discours. Ton Kwaronkwanyon de Yarona He Indara Soniwaha Tisha I. Nous le remercions encore une fois, celui qui vit au ciel, le Créateur. Shia et Utin, ne Oniwa Indiara. Et nos esprits continueront d'être ainsi. To Hyokti. Cela est ainsi. Yo. Maintenant, je vais interpréter pour vous la Fancy Shawl. Fancy Shawl, c'est une danse qui nous apprend à accepter la métamorphose. Dans le fond, c'est la chenille qui devient papillon pour nous aider à accepter toutes les métamorphoses, excusez-moi, que nous avons durant notre parcours sur cette terre.
That was fantastic. I think that's a great way to close. And again, everyone, thank you for coming. Thank you for attending. We look forward to having your feedback, comments, constructive feedback on today and yesterday. And I hope everybody travels safe. And also don't forget there's the food, but also the museum tour that starts at 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock till 2:15, and the tickets are from the AFN desk. So everyone travel safe and best of luck. Take care.